Good day, Dr. Helen Vicente, and welcome to this video presentation of an assumed research study entitled Good Coral Cover and High Density of Corals in Non-MPA Reefs of the Verde Island Passage as a Basis for Increased Protection and Conservation. This article was published in 2022 and authored by Miguel Enrique Maria Escuña, Jonel A. Coral, Enrico Velasquez, and JBA Saco. To begin with my presentation, we will start with the rationale and the problem statement of the paper. So the Verde Island Passage, or the BIP, is a globally recognized hotspot. According to Carpenter and Springer in 2005, it is part of the Center of Marine Shorefish Diversity. But despite this ecological importance, the BIP faces serious threats from unsustainable fishing, sedimentation, industrial pollution, and natural disturbances such as typhoons. Marine protected areas have been established to safeguard biodiversity. They even have an MPA network in the BIP consisting of many small MPAs. But the question remains about the effectiveness in maintaining the coral cover and diversity. Expanding and connecting MPAs is a global priority under frameworks like the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Coral Triangle Initiative. The coral reefs are under intense anthropogenic pressure, including the coral reefs of the BIP, which can lead to degradation and biodiversity loss. While MPA exists, it is unclear whether they are functioning effectively compared to non-MPA sites. There is also lack of comprehensive data on coral abundance and diversity across the province of the BIP. So without this information, it is really difficult to determine whether MPAs are achieving its conservation goals, which non-MPA sites may be resilient enough to be endorsed as future MPA, or how can the marine protected area network of the BIP can be strengthened for a long-term sustainability. So for the null hypothesis, there is no significant difference in the coral abundance and the generic richness between marine protected areas sites and non-MPA sites in the Verde Island Passage. So our working hypothesis would be that MPAs have better generic richness and abundance in terms of hard coral cover over non-MPA sites. So it is assumed, based on our issue and null hypothesis, that if the null hypothesis holds true, MPAs are not yet functioning effectively enough to counteract the ongoing disturbances. Human pressures can be so pervasive that even protected areas show similar coral conditions to unprotected ones. Testing coral abundance and diversity across MPA and non-MPAs will reveal whether current conservation strategies are sufficient or whether stronger, better enforced measures are needed. And for the significance of our study, the results of this study shall serve as a baseline data for biodiversity, and it's very important for a long-term monitoring of an MPA to determine its effectiveness. Another significance is the evaluation of MPA. This determines whether protection measures are working or should they be turning it to another strategy. Guidance and conservation for expansion. There might be non-MPA sites that could be an MPA in the future. Contribution to connectivity goals. So the results can strengthen MPA network, and of course it is aligned with the global targets supporting international conservation goals by prioritizing biodiversity-rich sites for protection aligned with the goals of CBD and the Coral Triangle initiatives. And of course, this is important or crucial for policy and management implications, not just in the BIP but in the entire Philippines. For the limitations of the study has a restricted geographical scope with only 4 provinces included. So we all know that BIP encompasses 5 provinces, and only 4 provinces were included due to logistical constraints in the province of Romblon. Another limitation of the study is that it has a short sampling time frame. The survey is conducted at different times, and survey was conducted once per site. Another limitation is the data or the study is focused on baseline assessment. So it only covers hard coral cover and the generic richness, and did not include any other ecological indicators as well as social and other indicators. For the scope of the study first is regional. It only covers the provinces in the BIP, or the body of water that is covered is just the BIP passage or the Verde Island passage. The ecological indicators included coral cover and diversity, and the study is comparative because the results of the MPA and non-MPA sites will be compared with the aim of informing conservation strategies and policy decisions. For our objectives, the general objective is to assess and compare coral abundance, that is represented by hard coral cover, and biodiversity based on generic richness of the corals, specifically the hard corals, between marine protected areas and non-marine protected areas in the Verde Island Passage. Specifically, the study aims to measure average hard coral cover relative to other benthic components including macroalgae, sand, rubble, rock sponges, etc. Determine generic richness, the number of coral genera present as a proxy for biodiversity in both MPA and non-MPA sites. And lastly, to identify dominant coral genera in sites to understand species composition and resilience. For our conceptual framework, this is our conceptual framework. The issues, this is based on the issues that threatens the BIP reefs, which are unsustainable fishing, sedimentation, pollution, and typhoons. And then we hypothesize that MPAs and non-MPAs have varying responses on the issues, and then to be able to answer our hypothesis, we'll be assessing the hard coral cover and the generic richness, and then we will compare. Now we will test our hypothesis whether there is no difference between the MPAs and non-MPAs. So the outcome would be the effectiveness of the MPAs, identify non-resilient MPA sites, and expand BIP marine protected area network aligned with the CBD and CTI goals. And for our theoretical framework, the theoretical framework of the paper or the study or the research integrates ecological resilience. It also integrates connectivity because the data will be used to improve further the Marine Protected Area Network, and the Conservation Effectiveness Theory. So, 3 theories: Ecological Resilience Theory, Connectivity Theory, and Conservation Effectiveness Theory. This is to justify the study design comparing coral health in MPAs versus non-MPAs to evaluate protection outcomes and guide future conservation strategies. These are our key definition of terms that are used in the study. We have the Verde Island Passage, or the BIP, a marine corridor in the Philippines, recognized as one of the world's center for marine biodiversity. We have Marine Protected Area, a designated section of the ocean where human activity is more strictly regulated to conserve biodiversity and protect ecosystem. In this study, MPAs are compared with non-MPA sites to assess coral health. We also have hard coral cover, the percentage of the reef area covered by live corals. It's actually an indication or an indicator of reef health and resilience. We have the generic richness, or the TAUS, taxonomical amalgamation units. So this is usually a combination of the genera and the life form of a particular coral. Okay, the number of coral genera present in site used as a proxy for biodiversity. Higher generic diversity indicates greater ecological resilience. Benthic components. These are organisms and substrate found in the ocean floor, including corals, macroalgae, sand, rubble, rocks, sponges, and other living things. Connectivity. It's an ecological concept that reefs are linked through larval dispersal, and it's very important for an MPA. MPA can act as source, or it can also act as reef, or the ones that receive larvae. Okay, the next term is anthropogenic stressors. Human-induced pressures such as unsustainable fishing, sedimentation, pollution, and coastal development are negatively impacting our coral reef. So this is in the context of the BIP. We have also the photo line intercept transect, a survey technique used to measure benthic cover and analyze photographs taken along transects laid across reefs. And lastly, the BIP, Marine Protected Area Network, a coordinated network of MPAs in the Verde Island Passage established to enhance protection, connectivity, and conservation effectiveness. So for our review of literature, as I have mentioned earlier, BIP is a recognized center, a hotspot for marine shorefish diversity, and it is facing anthropogenic disturbances. The MPAs are widely studied as tool for reef conservation. Literature shows that MPA can increase the coral cover and biodiversity when effectively managed, according to Magdaong et al. 2014. However, small isolated MPAs may be insufficient. Network of MPAs are more effective due to ecological connectivity, according to Jorge et 2015 and Wicks and co-authors 2014. So there is an ongoing seasonal current shifts in the BIP that allows larvae from both local and external sources to settle, strengthening reef resilience. Yes, the shift in the current strengthens the reef resilience because of the dispersal of larvae from source reefs to from donor reefs to the sink reefs, which accepts the larvae. So, in short, establishing more MPAs enhances this source sink dynamics. So, previous studies stress the importance of baseline ecological data for monitoring reef health and guiding conservation planning. This is according to Luco-Anan et al. 2019. Coral cover and generic richness are standard indicators used to evaluate reef condition. Conservation efforts in the BIP is aligned with the international frameworks such as the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Coral Triangle Initiative. Literature suggests that prioritizing biodiversity-rich areas for protection to minimize global biodiversity loss, according to Visconti and co-authors 2010. For our materials and methods, this is our location of the study area. So as shown in the map, the red red border or the red line represents the Verde Island Passage, which is located in the southwestern portion of Luzon in the Philippines. So it interfaces 5 provinces: Batangas, Occidental Mindoro, Oriental Mindoro, and Marinduque and Romblon. However, due to logistical constraints, the research or the study, the survey were only conducted in 4 provinces except Romblon. So again, there are 8 coral reef sites across 4 provinces. So for each provinces, there is a representation of an MPA and a non-MPA site. So what are the criteria? There are criterias, no? There were criterias in the selection of the sampling sites. First, the reef community should be at least 25 to 75 meters in size, and the minimum depth should be at least 5 and 15 meters maximum. At least 100 meters from the shore, facing the dominant monsoon, and lastly, there should be no rivers nearby to avoid sedimentation. So this sums up the characteristics of the reefs and the location of the sampling sites across the MPAs and non-MPAs in Batangas, Marinduque, Occidental, and Oriental Mindoro. Okay, for our research approach and design, our research is quantitative and it's comparative ecological approach. So it is focused more on baseline assessment for coral reef health by measuring, again, hard coral cover and generic richness. So the comparative aspect of the research is the comparison of the data between MPA versus non-MPA. So this is also an applied research where the findings were intended to guide conservation policy and the expansion of the Verde Island Passage Marine Protected Area Network. So the survey was conducted between 2020 to 2022. For the methods of data collection, on-site photo line intercept transect method by Nakajima et al. And English et al. Actually, it's a combination of the photo quadrat and the line intercept transect of English et al. So in this method, 50 meters transects were laid, and then for each site 5 transects were laid, and then 50 benthic photos per transect were taken. So per site, there's a total of 250 photos, benthic photos. And then these photos were processed using the CPCE 4.1 software, where the data generated are benthic cover, genetic diversity, and the dominant coral genera. So shown in the photo at the right is are 2 divers doing the photo line intercept transect method. So going back to CPCE, the processing of the data, so each site were scored. So for, again, there are 250 photos per site, and for each photos, 10 random points were scored. So there's a total of 2,550 photos per site, or 500 points per transect. So the data that were gathered were benthic cover, hard coral cover. For benthic cover, it's hard coral, the percentages of hard coral, macroalgae, rock, sand, rubble, sponge, and others. And then the hard corals were identified to genus level. Okay, so for the analysis and organization of the data, the study employed descriptive analysis and comparative analysis. For the descriptive analysis, mean values of hard coral cover and generic richness were calculated for each site. So standard deviations were used to show variability across sites. So for the comparative analysis, coral cover and generic richness between MPAs and non-MPAs were compared. And then, based on the hard coral and generic richness, the results were further categorized according to the categories of percentage abundance by Licuanan 2020 and the diversity richness categories still by Licuanan 2020. So these are the categories to which we could determine the reef health based on the hard coral cover and the generic diversity. Okay. These are this sums up the results of the mean hard coral cover across the 8 sites, as well as the dominant genera and the number or the generic diversity across the 8 sampling sites across the BIP. So for the results or the highlights of the results, Batangas and non-MPA showed higher biodiversity than high biodiversity compared to MPA, and the category of the generic richness is category A, which is quite high. In Marinduque, it showed similar result with Batangas. The non-MPA had higher coral cover and diversity despite human settlements nearby. And then for Occidental and Oriental Mindoro, the MPAs had higher coral cover and biodiversity, and specifically or notably in Oriental Mindoro, MPA clearly outperformed non-MPA, which had very low coral cover. Okay. So what are the implications of this? What does this data say? Okay. First is the effectiveness of the MPA. Batangas and Marinduque are both newly established, so more or less 5 to 10 years, and are facing natural disturbances, while Occidental and Oriental Mindoro MPAs have longer management histories. So that's one reason why non-MPA sites in Batangas and Marinduque have higher coral cover and richness. Okay, so the non-MPA sites are resilient. 3 out of 4 showed good coral cover and diversity and could be endorsed to future MPAs. Okay, the coral cover in the BIP sites, both MPA and non-MPA, is generally at a higher percentage than national average as reported in the West Philippine Sea by Licuanan and the Visayan Sea. So it is generally higher. So in short, the hard coral is the reef condition, despite that there are areas that have low coral cover and low diversity, the entire BIP still showed good reef health condition compared to other coral reefs in other regions in the Philippines. So for the summary, Occidental and Oriental Mindoro MPAs have higher coral cover and biodiversity compared to non-MPAs. Batangas and Marinduque, non-MPAs surprisingly outperformed their MPAs due to the factors like recent establishment of MPAs and typhoon damage. Overall, coral cover in the BIP sites are higher than national average, underscoring the ecological importance of the region. Several non-MPA sites demonstrated resilience and could be considered for future protection. So for our conclusion, MPAs are generally effective in conserving corals, but their success depends on management history, enforcement, and local disturbances. So this is actually true in terms of the Batangas and Marinduque, which are newly established, and the Occidental and Oriental Mindoro, which have already long history of MPA management or protection, and showed that MPAs have higher cover and diversity compared to non-MPAs. Some non-MPA sites in Batangas and Marinduque showed strong coral cover and diversity, highlighting their potential to be endorsed as future MPAs. Strengthening and expanding the BIP protected area network is crucial to enhance the connectivity, resilience, and biodiversity conservation. So, continuous monitoring and integration of ecological and social assessments are recommended to ensure sustainable reef management. Okay, for our implications and recommendations, MPAs generally support higher cover and biodiversity, but their success depends on management history. The presence of resilient non-MPA sites suggests opportunities to expand and strengthen the BIP protected area network. And then local conservation efforts in the BIP have global significance due to its status as a biodiversity hotspot. So this baseline ecological data for coral cover and diversity in the BIP can guide future monitoring, adaptive management, and policy decisions. So for our recommendations, we endorse that resilient non-MPA sites in Batangas and Marinduque can be a part of the future MPA to strengthen the MPA network in BIP. The conduct of regular ecological surveys is also recommended to track changes in coral cover and biodiversity and include both biological and social assessments to ensure community support and effective management. It is also recommended that to improve the enforcement and management of existing MPAs, especially those recently established, to maximize their effectiveness. And address stressors such as sedimentation, pollution, and unsustainable fishing practices. And lastly, enhance the MPA design with ecological connectivity, identifying the sources of the larvae as well as the sink reefs. Okay, for this particular research, we would like to acknowledge the Department of Science and Technology, Philippine Council for Agriculture, Aquatic and Natural Resources Research and Development, or the DOSTP card, for funding the project Marine Biodiversity Assessment of the Verde Island Passage, and the municipal government offices of Lobo, Pagkilatan, Kaganhaw, Libas, Gloria, Sabang, and Abra de Ilog. And these are the references that we cited in the paper. And thank you very much for your attention, and God bless us all.